Let's start with one that I think is the least likely of the three. So I'm going a little out of order. Georgia loses. If Georgia loses, I think that eliminates Tennessee from being in the college football playoff because I don't think the SEC gets 2 games in. Now, that it was actually brought up by Ron Slay. I hadn't even thought about that. I don't think there's a real chance of that happening, but we've seen crazier things happen in the SEC championship game. So, what do you make of the chances that Georgia loses at Mississippi State, at Kentucky? They host Georgia Tech, and then the SEC championship game. Amanda, your thoughts?
I don't think it's likely. I mean, I really would give Georgia maybe a 5% chance of losing one of those games. And I mean, even the SEC championship, they'll face LSU more than likely. And if they face LSU, then I think that it'll be an easy road for Georgia. The only one I would be a little nervous about is Mississippi State, but we saw what Alabama did to Mississippi State, and I think Georgia could handle them fairly easily. I don't think Kentucky has anything for Georgia. I don't see it. The only way I would see Georgia losing is if Alabama made it to the SEC championship game, and they can't. So there's no point.
Well, John said, will they actually take a 2 loss SEC champ? This is what the college football playoff probably does not want to happen because if LSU were to make it or Alabama with 2 losses and win the SEC championship game, then you look at it and you think if this is any sort of playoff, if the SEC championship game really matters, then you would have to take the 2 loss team, right? But if you look at body of work, Georgia would have a better body of work. So John brings up a fantastic point. Would they take a 2 loss SEC championship team, which I believe is this scenario is somewhat possible because I don't believe there's an elite team, Georgia included, or would they take Georgia coming off a win? Amanda, I don't know the answer to that question. That is very, very difficult.
I think the playoff committee looks at. I mean, we've seen in the past. It's the playoff committee looks at what have you done for me lately. How have you won? How have you squeaked by, or when you did lose, how did you lose? I mean, they look at things that are pertaining more to how the team has grown versus how they started and you know, where they started preseason. They look at, okay, LSU started with a loss at Florida State and then got destroyed by Tennessee. But if they go out and win everything, win the SEC championship, they're looking at how much this team has grown and where they are at that moment versus if it were Georgia and Georgia dropped the SEC championship and didn't look like they were that great, it looks like they have gone down. So I think they would put LSU in there. I don't know if you would necessarily put Georgia in there. I know that sounds crazy. Trust me, I know that sounds crazy. But they do that. They look at where you are at the moment the playoffs start. Where is your team? So I think if you dropped, like, say Georgia, or I don't know, yeah, say Georgia dropped Stetson Bennett. Say he just something happened, he got hurt, and they lost the game at LSU. I don't think they put Georgia in just because there's no Stetson Bennett and they know it's not going to be a great game. That's just my opinion from watching this for so long.
I would like for them to take body of work, but as Brittany points out, with the decisions this committee has already made, I think it's tough to even assume to know what they're thinking. That's true. I think there is also some television survivor fact in there that we have mentioned before. But if you had to take a 2 loss team or a Georgia team that lost in the SEC championship game, I would go, Dave Hooker would go with body of work, and that would be Georgia. But it sounds like you're saying they would go with the 2 loss team because they're the ones that just beat Georgia, which would certainly make sense. If you're making a college football playoff and this team just beat the other one, then why wouldn't you take the team that just beat the other one?
You want to take whoever's hot. I mean, that's what they're going for. That's why when, they said Penn State won the Big Ten, Ohio State jumped them because Ohio State lost early in the season, but they were the team that was hot at the time. They looked better, so they took Ohio State.
Yep. Mash that thumbs up button, like, subscribe, and share. We greatly appreciate that. Dean saying they're going to put the 2 to 4 most entertaining teams in because it's all about drawing the money. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that helps Tennessee. But I also think to some extent, if you just want to say style of play, it helps Texas Christian, which leads us to, now don't get me wrong, I think the College Football Playoff Committee would rather have Georgia in there than Texas Christian. But if Texas Christian wins out, that's a bugaboo. And they will play Texas this week. They're a touchdown underdog. The Horned Frogs have had a fantastic season. They feel like the feel-good season, but so did Cincinnati last year. And what happened? Cincinnati ended up crashing the party, and they were a part of the college football playoff. So while it feels like they're just having a good time and they're a good story, don't rule them out. Again, Texas, a 7-point favorite. There's a good chance that TCU's run comes to an end this weekend. That would be good for Tennessee, considering TCU has 2 very winnable regular season games left against Baylor and Iowa State. Then there's the Big 12 SEC, the Big 12 championship game. If TCU goes undefeated, it would be tough to leave the Horned Frogs out, Amanda, and put Tennessee in if those are the 2 teams that you're talking about. One has a loss and one does not. Good morning, Jamie. That would be difficult. It would be hard to make that argument with TCU still in the Big 12, and that's not the Big 10 and that's not the SEC, but that's a Power 5 conference. So it would be incredibly difficult to leave them out if they're undefeated and Tennessee has 1 loss.
I mean, I could see that, but I could also see I don't know, I can't remember who posted it, but to their point of money, TCU's not going to bring in much money. I mean, you're in Texas, you're Texas Christian. Like you have Texas A&M, you have Texas Tech. I mean, you have all of these schools, you have Oklahoma right there. The fan base, TCU doesn't have a big fan base.
No.
The Horned Frogs don't have a big fan base. So
Can I stop you for half a second? Because I agree with you from the marketing aspect. But what money?
What do you mean?
Okay, so the games are all going to sell out, even if TCU were to play Ohio State. Ohio State's going to gobble up the tickets. So the gate is not what we're talking about. But I think what you're talking about is probably future television contracts. Okay, yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, Ohio State, Tennessee in round 1 is a lot sexier than Ohio State, TCU. Zero question.
Yes, I think you'll have the viewership, advertising, all that stuff. You will have Ohio State, Tennessee would just, I don't know, 5 times maybe the viewership that Ohio State, TCU would bring, or TCU anyone would bring. I mean, realistically, no one wants to watch TCU. I mean, no offense to TCU, but no one really wants. I'm not sitting here like on, Saturday waiting for the TCU game. I don't think anybody is.
No, I think you have to go to TCU to basically be that person. Now, the other scenario that I think you want to avoid is the Michigan-Ohio State game being close. If that is close, much like we had talked about some sort of scenario that the SEC could get 2 teams in, for now, the Big Ten has every bit the pull that the SEC does. I believe that's going to change when they divide themselves among the TV networks. Amanda and I disagree a little bit. She thinks Fox will be every bit as strong or stronger than ESPN. I think ESPN will have more pull, but that's yet to be determined. The bottom line is, as of right now, if those 2 teams play in some sort of epic, awesome matchup, I could see the College Football Playoff Committee saying, hey, let's get those 2 teams back in it. Don't play each other in the semifinals and then a rematch, much like Georgia, Alabama last year in the finals. That would draw TV numbers. It wouldn't draw great TV numbers in the South, But if it was some sort of close, epic game, that's a game I would go out of my way to watch. I'm going to watch
Yeah.
them anyway, but I would watch that.
I mean, I would watch the regular season game, Ohio State, Michigan. I don't know if I would necessarily be inclined to watch it if it's the championship game. And I know I like the championship game, and but it's like we've already seen this, and the only thing is we just saw this. It's not like it's Tennessee, Georgia, where you see it in week, what is it, 8? I don't know, my brain's fried. It's not like it's Tennessee, Georgia, where you see it earlier in the season. Michigan, Ohio State played the last game. They play Thanksgiving week. Not the last game, but the next. I don't know. Anyway, they play really close to the end of the season. So if you're looking at that and it's really close to the end of the season, you don't want to see that happen again in a month. That's the
Now,
only downfall I could see.
I felt the same way though about Georgia and Alabama last year, but I thought they were the two best teams, so I went out of my way to watch. So if I see an epic regular season matchup, I'm going to go out of my way to watch. Lex says, does Tennessee need to hang 40 on the last three teams to have a chance? You shake your head, yes, Amanda. Why?
I think Tennessee needs to show that they're dominant and that the Georgia loss was a one-time thing. Basically, I think they need to show that it was a bad atmosphere, that it was, that they just weren't as prepared as they should have been. All of the other outside factors maybe had something to do with it. Not saying that it did, but maybe that's how you get in. And that you go out and you destroy the next three opponents. If you destroy them, that shows the college football committee that maybe that was just an off day for you and you belong playing the best of the best. If you don't do that, then the college football committee is going, is this really the team that we thought they were when we put them at number one?
I think you're right, but man, I hope that, and you didn't use it, but essentially what we're talking about is style points. And I know that that was something that coaches had to think about. And what style points means, it means bad sportsmanship. It means running up the score. And I think Tennessee's offense does that naturally, so it's not going to be outside of their normal realm. But back when it was just a two-team playoff or the college football championship game, you had to do that and you had to run up style points. And that was just a darn shame. That's not the way. You're not supposed to rub somebody's nose in it. And I think that Tennessee doesn't necessarily have to hang 40, but I think they've got to show that they weren't some gimmick early in the year. And I don't believe they are, but I think they have to show that they weren't a gimmicky playoff or a gimmicky team early on and that they deserve to make the playoff because this offense is for real, it's formidable, and it's not just chucking up points to chuck up points. Dan says UT needs to pound Mizzou worse than UGA did to them. Comparisons matter. I won't argue with that.
That
I think
should
as
be
much as
easy.
anything, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that should be easy because Georgia barely squeaked by Mizzou, so it should be
Yeah.
easy.
Mizzou's pretty good defensively, which I think is probably a little scarier than people think. But Tennessee needs to win that game convincingly. I don't know about 40 points, Amanda, but they need to win that game and look like the Georgia thing was the aberration, not that the rest of the season was the aberration. We have another comment. OSU and Michigan have just been beating up on poor teams all year. Their rankings and hype seem overinflated to me. Amanda, I think you and I agree on that.
Yeah, I think Ohio State definitely. Michigan, I think they're beating some teams more, I don't know, handedly, I guess, than Ohio State is. They look like a more like rounded team. I think they look better as far as their offense is concerned, which is crazy considering CJ Stroud and all that, blah, blah, blah. I think we've seen that CJ Stroud is not that good. I mean, he's good, don't get me wrong, but he's not the end all be all like they had originally said at the beginning of the season. And I don't think that he is.
Agree.